Thank you for coming out on a cold, cold night. Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte was a Baltimore legend, a curiosity, walking slowly down the streets of the city in the 1870s, her trademark red parasol held high above her head to protect her from sun or rain, or in winter weather draped carefully over one arm. On the other arm she carried an ornate, elaborately embellished bag that it was rumored held all her jewels. Her dress was no longer fashionable, perhaps made in that bygone era when Napoleon dominated Europe and America was little more than a fledgling nation. No matter, it was clear she had once been a great beauty, and even in her old age she conveyed an elegance and a sense of superiority that captured admiration as well as curiosity. As she stopped at one building and then the next, rapping on doors and demanding the rent owed to her by the tenants, passerbys might have recognized her as their city's and their country's first female celebrity. Had those same passerbys followed her home after her business was completed, they would have at once again marveled at her eccentricity, despite all the property she owned, and she owned a lot. Both in the city and in surrounding areas, she abhorred the idea of setting up a household, and she chose to live in a rented room on the top floor of a stranger's home. The small room was crowded with ornate furniture, every surface covered with souvenirs, a single closet bulging with faded ball gowns that had been worn in the heady days after France's emperor was sent into exile. And there, in an atmosphere heavy with memory and nostalgia, they would have found her, poised to tell her story, with the same sharp wit and sense of irony and the same powers of observation that had always been as much a part of her as her extraordinary beauty and her extraordinary ambition. She had lived a long and remarkable life, and she knew she had a remarkable story to tell. Betsy never got to tell that story, although she left scores of her own letters and annotated many of those that had been written to her. Wondrous Beauty is my effort to tell that story for her. From the beginning, I realized I had stumbled upon a fascinating personal story that begged to be told. But it proved more than that. For Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte's private life was lived in public. She was perhaps the first genuine female celebrity in our nation, and newspapers carried accounts of what she wore, where she went, what she did, with a relish that today's gossip columnists would surely recognize. More importantly, her most personal choices had repercussions in the halls of power on two continents. Thus, her story offered me as her biographer not only the chance to recreate its drama, and there was a lot of drama, but also to explore and analyze its impact on the larger world of 19th century politics, war, and struggles for power. Most satisfying of all for me, because I am a historian of women, Betsy Bonaparte's struggle to be more than the gender ideology of her day allowed offers the opportunity to measure not only the cost of social conformity, but the cost of individual female rebellion. Her story begins like a fairy tale. He was a dashing French naval officer who was also the youngest brother of the great Napoleon Bonaparte. She was Baltimore's acknowledged most beautiful belle, a 17-year-old who was desperate to escape what she considered the humdrum, mediocre, and constricting society of her native Baltimore, as well as her very overbearing father. The two young people met. They fell in love, as perhaps only teenagers then and now can do. The stories that are told of the first encounter between Jerome and Betsy are themselves really the stuff of romance. Some record that he saw her at one of Maryland's many horse races, her plumed hat shading her lovely face, and he knew in an instant he was in love. Others recorded that they met at a fancy ball, and as they danced, her pearls became entwined in the buttons of his coat, a sign, the observers declared, of their entwined destinies. And still others insist that she saw him coming up the walk of her friend's home, and she exclaimed at once, "He is the man I will marry." Which, if any of these tales is true, is unknown. But neither Betsy's father, William, nor the French consul in America were willing to give their blessings to this relationship. William Patterson had serious misgivings about Jerome's intentions and his character. Misgivings, by the way, that proved to be all too accurate. Jerome, I guess this is not the technical term, but Jerome was a weasel. And the consul warned bluntly that Napoleon would never approve his brother's marriage to a commoner. But Betsy and Jerome were deaf to all opposition. Jerome Bonaparte, who really was a spoiled brat, confessed I'm not fond of him, confessed a weakness for possessing beautiful things, and he was determined to possess Betsy. And Betsy was ready to dramatically declare to her father, and if any of you have ever had a teenage daughter, you can recognize the kind of statement she made, "I would rather be the wife of Jerome Bonaparte for an hour than the wife of any other man for a lifetime." In the face of his daughter's stubbornness, William Patterson surrendered. Elizabeth and Jerome were married on Christmas Eve, 1803. The young couple immediately became famous in America. They were feted and fussed over in the nation's capital and in its other major cities, and newspapers everywhere carried accounts of their activities. Jerome ran up enormous debts, purchasing an elegant home, expensive furnishings, fancy carriages, and extravagant gifts for his wife, all of which he could not afford. Yet America's elite vied with one another to be seen in his company and to extend him credit. In Washington, Betsy shocked the wives of congressmen by appearing in the latest French fashions, dresses without layers of undergarments, with plunging necklines, and capped sleeves that revealed her arms. As one woman put it, "She has made a great noise here, and mobs of boys have crowded round to see what I hope will not often be seen in this country, an almost naked woman." Another noted with alarm that the men at the elegant ball she had attended could see Betsy's boobies. What was fashion in Paris was clearly indecent exposure in America. "We are not meant to be separated," Jerome often assured Betsy over the next 2 years, and yet soon they were. For there's no happily ever after to this romantic tale. In 1805, Betsy was pregnant, and the couple decided to sail to France, hoping to win Napoleon over to the marriage. But France's emperor had other ideas. He immediately issued orders that the now pregnant Betsy was forbidden to set foot on European soil. He also forced the French Senate to annul the marriage. He tried to get the Pope to annul the marriage, but William Patterson had been clever enough to have them be married by the Archbishop in Baltimore, and the Pope said it's a legal marriage. Later, Napoleon imprisoned the Pope. I'm not saying he carried a grudge, but he imprisoned the Pope. So he had the French Senate annul the marriage. He then demanded that Jerome come before him, and after berating his younger brother, issued an ultimatum. Either you abandon that American girl and marry a princess or a woman of the nobility I choose, or I'll disown you and cut off your allowance. The weak-willed and materialistic Jerome caved in at once, and he was soon married to a stout, but very nice, by the way, unattractive German princess. Betsy would not see Jerome again for decades, until by chance she passed him in a gallery of the Pitti Palace. While Jerome capitulated to his brother, Betsy, who could find no European port willing to welcome her, was forced to find refuge in England. Here she gave birth to her only child, a son, who she named Jerome. Everyone in this family is named Jerome. It became very difficult for me to figure out how to tell you which Jerome I was talking about. Abandoned and betrayed, she had little choice but to return to America as soon as she was able. So the fairy tale ends here, but Betsy's own story was really just beginning. Her abandonment transformed her from a naive